Because according to the World Economic Forum, when you use an index called Purchasing Power Parity, the African economy shoots up to 6.6 trillion. So your question is, what is purchasing power parity? Purchasing power parity is simply an economic index which is used to calculate the differences between the cost of goods and services in specific African countries or third world countries or developing countries as opposed to the developed nation. So how many of us live in Oka? Say aye. So my question to those of you in Oka, how much do you think that the person who spends his money on a breakfast meal in New York and the person who spends his money on a breakfast meal in Oka, is it the same thing? The rent you pay in Oka and the rent you pay in London, is it the same thing? It's not. So the standards of living and the cost of living in Oka cannot be compared with the cost of living in New York. So when they give you GDP and tell you Africa's GDP is 3.4 trillion, they are using a standard that is assuming that the cost of living in every single country in the world is the same thing. But we know that that is not true. So if you want to have the real economic GDP for Africa, you must use Purchasing Power Parity Index, because that index accommodates for the low cost of living standards as compared to the high income countries in Africa. And so African GDP is 6.6 trillion. That means, and when you call that figure, I just came back from a roadshow in the United States, and I made this argument with quite a number of investors. And the moment you make this argument and you call the actual figure, then they get interested, they get excited. 6.6 trillion, that means we're larger than a lot of the other economic blocks. And we are growing. It means that if you look at Africa as a single market, we're about number 3 or number 4 in the world. And so there's huge opportunity in Africa. Africa also has 1.2 billion people. And it has the fastest growing population across the world, also has the youngest population across the world. And every study that you read now will tell you that the world's workforce, the working force of the entire world, is going to come from Africa over the next 20 years. Because as Dr. Ifedior has said, most of the other populations are in decline. Some European populations are having negative growth in terms of their population. So the only place in the world that is growing positively, in fact exponentially, is Africa. So the economic experts now are looking to Africa to provide the workforce of the future. So it's important that we know this. Now we do have challenges. About 126 million young people are unemployed. We have challenges of healthcare, and we have challenges of infrastructure. But we also have opportunities. Now let's look at the opportunities for Nigeria. The Nigerian diaspora is a huge area of opportunity. That group sent to Nigeria $25 billion last year. Do you know how much we made in oil, crude oil sales? 29 billion. So by next year, the diaspora remittances coming from Nigerians living abroad will be more than what Nigeria is earning from crude oil. Just so that you can see the dynamics. There are strategic programs for business across the world. Like Ifediora said, the United States has started something they call Prosper Africa Initiative, They are also setting up what they call a development finance corporation, and they're capitalizing it with 60 billion US dollars. A lot of that money will be available for African businesses. The European Union has what they call the European Union Investment Plan. They are putting aside 40 billion euro to support business in Africa. There's the Economic Partnership Agreement for African imports, so if you want to export to Europe. And then Europe also has the EBA, the Anything But Arms Agreement. 32 African nations can export free into Europe. And then there is the granddaddy, which is the Africa Free Trade Agreement. The Africa Free Trade Area, which makes that 6.6 trillion that I talked about is now one marketplace, because there are no tariffs between Africa, between the countries, if you want to do. So it could be a huge opportunity, but it can also be a threat to your business. It can also be a threat, because I was having a conversation with some business people the other day, and one of them told me that the moment he heard that Nigeria signed the African Free Trade Area, he hasn't slept, because he knows that the competitors from South Africa are going to come and start selling their goods and services. The guy is into cosmetics. They're going to come and start selling to the Nigerian market. So he has to upgrade himself. It means that we have to do what? We have to upgrade, because the party is over and we can't hide anymore. So we have to become more efficient, we have to become more strategic, and then we also have to look to go into their own markets, because they're going to come to us. We have the largest market in Africa. So if you wait and you're not making plans to go into their market, they will come and fight with you in your market. So you better make plans to go and fight with them in their market. But this is going to happen in every product and every service. Nigeria has signed. Most 27 countries have ratified. The other few will ratify before the end of this year. By the first quarter of 2020, it is expected that the African Free Trade Agreement will take off, and then the games will start. So if you are in a business producing consumer products, you should have a strategic plan to address this challenge. But it's also an opportunity. It's a huge opportunity. The Francophone countries, Sierra Leone and Cameroon and so on and so forth, they import everything, including toilet paper, from France. So it means that we have an opportunity to go into those markets and dominate them. So it's an opportunity, but it could be a threat. So it depends on you as a businessman or woman. But let's look at the whole concept of global capital strategy. So I define it as the ability to identify and attract capital, and the ability to strategically position your firm, venture, project, community, or nation to receive favorable attention and subsequent investment from international financial investors and their representatives. Now, strategic positioning includes what I call the business excellence matrix. So if somebody is going to invest in your business, you cannot expect them to invest in your business if you haven't created a structure. So that structure must reflect what I call business excellence. Everybody that is working in that organization must have a defined role and responsibility. And those defined roles and responsibilities must be backed up by procedures and processes. There are approval limits at every level, And the whole thing must all come together towards a very efficient way to deliver value. That is, in a nutshell, what I call business excellence. It goes in depth. But the truth is that if you don't have a business excellence matrix in your company, nobody is going to be investing in you. So that's the first step in the global capital strategy. The global capital investors will look out for companies that have adopted a business excellence matrix. So you must have, even if you're not quite there yet, you must be working towards that matrix. The next thing they look out for is you must have a local or a global market strategy. So your strategy must be targeted at either the local market or the global market. So what are you selling? How are you selling it? To whom are you selling? Is it sustainable? Is it a product or a service that can be sold consistently over a long period of time? This is what they're going to be looking for. Another thing they look out for are the local and global opportunities for expansion, because they want to make sure that they're going to get their money back, right? So they're going to look for that. And then, of course, your personnel, the people who are going to drive the execution. So I just try to give you a tidbit. It's kind of like expo if you're a student. How many of us know the word expo? So I'm giving you the expo because I've worked in that environment. I used to work in a company called Merrill Lynch. I was an international finance investor. And so I understand what they are looking for. And of recent, I've had opportunity to engage with them consistently. So here I've given you an idea of what the business excellence matrix looks like. The first thing in the matrix is the structure. So we're looking for a lean structure which is cost reflective and efficient. So that's the first thing we'll look for if we are trying to give you a business excellence matrix. The second thing is sustainability. Is your business sustainable? So are you selling a business that might only be in demand for one season? How many people know a business that is only in demand once and then all of a sudden it goes out of fashion? Can you have an idea? Football jersey for World Cup. Is this something you can sell again? Can't sell it again. Once the World Cup is over, that product is gone. There are many products like that. So you have to make sure that your product is not like that. Okay? Then, of course, your personnel, systems, and your succession. One of the biggest problems we have in this part of the world is our lack of succession. Wouldn't you agree? It's a big problem, especially in Igbo land, especially in our place. It's a serious issue. And we're still resisting it. You can count on your hands, on one hand, the businesses that have survived beyond the founder in our place. You know? I'm very friendly with some of the greatest business names in Igbo land. And some of them I'm friendly with their kids because they were a bit of a higher generation than me. One of the families that I'm very close to, or I was very close to, was the Ilodibe family. You know Ilodibe? Ekele Didichukwu went to school with his daughter, Njideka, very good friend of mine. When we were in school, then that company had over 2,000 to 3,000 buses. Just buses alone. Then trailers. They had another 2,000 to 3,000 trailers. I mean, this company was huge. They had departments all over the country. I don't think any transport company has even gotten to the size Ekene Ichuku was in those days. Do you know of any? I don't think so. Even God is Good is just about 800 buses now. Ekene Ichuku had 3,000 then. And they had another 3,000 trailers. And then they had another, 1,000 or 2,000 smaller buses. They were huge. Then they had yards in Lagos. If anybody who knows Lagos, on the way to Alausa, that stretch where 7-Up is, on the left-hand side, they owned acres of land. That was their yard. All gone. Now, gone. It is a shadow of itself today. It is a case study in how not to do things the traditional way. We have to learn how to do things right. So sustainability is very, very important. Then the next thing is technology. We're going to look to use the right technology. We're living in the 21st century. I'm going to talk a little bit about technology towards the end of the presentation. But it's important that you understand the value of technology in your business. So if you have a proposal, you're writing to your bank or you're writing to an investor, have a section on technology. They like to see that. Okay? Then of course capital, talked about that already. Plants and machinery, talents and technology, cloud services. And when we're looking at capital, they always want to see where you have your own investment. So where is your own capital coming from and what have you put in? And then an area that we overlook again in this part of the world, or this part of Nigeria, is in the training, coaching, mentorship. It is a big challenge getting Nigerian companies or even Igbo-run companies to train their people. You know? I don't even want to share with you some of the responses that some of our people give when you tell them training is important. They don't believe it is. But global capital investors, they are looking out for it. If you don't have a training plan for developing your people, you're not going to get their money. So they're going to be looking out for that too. So training is part and parcel of business development. You must train your people. Then of course the markets. So I've given you a rundown of what they are looking for so that you can have an idea. I didn't give you everything. I'm not supposed to give you everything. I'm sure you know why. But I've given you enough to whet your appetite. What I'm doing now is I'm going to tell you where the money is. Okay? So who is eyeing Africa? Now, first of all, there is the private sector. Many of us might not be able to meet the criteria of the private sector. They're very strict, they're very stringent, but they have the lion's share of the money. So the private sector, they have over $1 trillion that is available for investment. These are through private equity, venture capital. I have a friend, I used to work in Merrill Lynch, as I told you before. Many of the people I worked with back in those days are now managing funds across the world. Many of them are managing private equity funds. One of my friends that manages a fund out of London, he is focused on Africa and Nigeria. But he's always complaining that he can't find companies to invest in. And it's not because there are no companies. It's because none of the companies meet his criteria based on the business excellence matrix I just shared with you. Okay? So There's money in the private place, but we need to really be up and doing to get that money.